Hey guys, I am starting a new project. This is going to be a book nook for my wife, and she is a big Old West cowboy fan. And so I'm going to build her a little book nook for her office, which is going to be actually rather cool. My plan is to build a scene where cowboys are standing around a campfire. There is going to be a rock wall that surrounds them and a gold mine nearby. And then along the top of that rock wall is going to be a couple of Indians sneaking along. I think it's going to be really cool. For this one, I normally build my own boxes, but I decided to try something different because I'm wanting to streamline my process a little bit more. And this is a pre-cut book nook box. It is 8 inches high, 8 inches deep, and 10 inches wide. So it's about the size of a piece of paper. And so the rock wall will run along here. There'll be a mine shaft right there. And then the rock wall will run along the back and then around the side. It will only go about so far because there's going to be the Indians creeping along the top there. In the center will be a campfire. And then my cowboys will be arrayed near the campfire. So my son had this great idea. And it was to, instead of making random cowboys on here, to actually make the cowboys members of our own family. So I went on Hero Forge and I designed 4 cowboy characters. In it, my wife's character will hear a sound coming from the back of the book nook, and she will have her lantern in hand, and she will be shining that light up onto the rock wall to try to see what's going on. My son's going to be crouched down at the campfire, warming his hands. My daughter will be playing her violin, and my son will be, and I will be standing there eating a turkey leg. At least that's kind of how I have them designed right now. So the first part of this diorama is going to be building those rock walls. And I've looked around to see how I could make some convincing looking rock walls. And I think I'm settled on a plaster of Paris approach that is molded using aluminum foil. I've seen a couple of people do it. I thought it looked really good. I have also picked up from a ghost town in Arizona a number of rocks that I want to integrate into the project. They are from a real Wild West ghost town, and I think my wife will appreciate that as well. So let's get started.
Does brevity exist in your repertoire, sir?
The first step to this process is making your form. Here I'm using aluminum foil, which I crinkled up quite a bit, pressed it out flat, and then bent up the edges to make a bowl to hold the plaster of Paris. Now, I wish I could tell you an exact ratio at which to mix the plaster of Paris and water, but realistically, I just eyeball it. I add a little water and add a little water more until it feels like the right consistency to me. Once I thought the plaster was just about right, I went ahead and poured it into my mold. Now, right up front here, I'm going to admit that I screwed up. I did not put a mold release agent down on my foil to start with. Now, this could have been something as simple as some very diluted dish soap lightly sprayed over the foil. I did not do that, and as a result, I had a heck of a time picking out all the little flecks of aluminum foil that was stuck onto my rock. And now it's time to just leave it alone and let it harden. Once the plaster was cured and I got all the foil off of it, this is what the rock wall looked like. you notice all the diagonal striations in the wall. That was on purpose. I wanted it to look like layers of the earth had been compacted and pushed aside like you would see in a real rock wall. And if you look closely, you can see those little aluminum bits still stuck in the plaster. I've looked online. Some of the guys, what they do is they basically just break this thing up. Now that it's broken up, I can rebuild it on the back here in a way that makes it a little bit more random than even the aluminum foil made it. The plaster wasn't quite thick enough to form the ledge that my American Indians needed to walk on. So as a result, I built it up with a piece of foam, then organized my rocks onto that foam, and then I glued everything down to make it look just exactly the way I wanted it to. Now it was time to fill in the cracks. Now here I used plaster of Paris to fill these cracks in, and I believe it to be a big mistake. The big reason why is that the very dry plaster was thirsty for water. So as I tried to fill the cracks with the moist, watery plaster, the rocks just wanted to soak that up. My plaster cured amazingly fast. To do this again, I think I might use a different medium to fill these cracks. And later on in the build, I used Sculptamold to fill cracks, and that worked wonderfully. And I think that I would probably do that again. In fact, I think that you could probably make all of the rocks out of Sculptamold and skip the plaster of Paris altogether, and that would make for a much lighter box. The next step was to cut a sidewall for where the mine opening would go. I measured that carefully, then drew what I thought would be an appropriate sized mine opening onto my foam, then cut that out. Notice the T-shape, that's on purpose. Then I glued it into place. Once I had done that, I textured some timbers and fit those carefully into that T-shape to make the opening of my mine. Notice how the timbers come up a little bit out of the foam wall, and that's mostly so that there could be rock laid in there next to them, and so it looks like the timbers are holding the rocks up. On the opposite side of the box, I cut another piece and then put in an arch. I have my little rocky alcove built now. I want to start taking apart the pieces and clean up all the sloppage that I got on the plaster, and then start working on building my scene out a little bit more. Then I'm going to bring them back together and fill in these gaps over here so it really does look more rocky. I never glued any of these side walls in place simply because I knew I was going to take them apart. So after removing the tape, then I was able to just kind of gently pull them apart into their component pieces. On one section, I ended up breaking a little bit of the rock wall. That turned out to actually be a happy accident because I needed to run some wiring through that wall, and the crack that I had made was the very most perfect place to make that passage. Now remember earlier when I said that I wanted to make it look like there were layers of rocks, and so I put in those wrinkles in the plaster cast. Now what I did after that was I took a very stiff wire brush and I started just sanding into those rocks, creating the striations, the very fine striations that you would see in such a layering. And so I was able to do that by etching in scratches all along the rock face. The next thing to build was the campfire. I really wanted this to look nice since it was going to be the centerpiece of the book nook and one of its main lighting sources. I started out taking a little bit of plastic and cutting a circle on it and then gluing basically just dust and dirt onto the surface of it. I laid some wax paper down and then put my fire pit circle on top of that. Positioned a red LED in place and then used hot glue to secure that exactly where I wanted. Now it was time to place the yellow flickering light. This will be the flame that is coming out of the campfire. It's going to be placed slightly above the red LED. The next step was to add the burning embers. I started with Bondic glue and gave a hefty coat over all of the cooled hot glue. Then I got these little tiny glass beads and sprinkled them over the still wet Bondic. Once you do that, then you can add the UV light, which will set the Bondic in place and set your little glass beads. The next step after that is to just very faintly paint those beads with kind of a watered down black paint, which will give them that glowing ember effect. I took some little twigs from a plant outside and cut those down into size and then glued those in place around the campfire. After that, I got some of my ghost town rocks and started building up the perimeter of the campfire. For the flame on the campfire, I used a trick that I saw another YouTuber do, which was take a glue stick and carve it into the shape of your fire. You can then use your hot glue gun to build the little tips of the flames licking off the top, and then just a light hit with a flame will clear up the exterior of the glue stick and make it somewhat shiny, and that'll allow the light to shine through better. Then I just planted my glue stick flame right on the tip of my flickering yellow light. Campfire actually looks really good. And so now the true test is, what's it going to look like lit up? Oh. Okay, well, let's see. That looks great. Definitely has a nice look to it. Now it was time to work on the wiring. First thing I did was drill a hole on the side of the box for the AC adapter. I had to rejoin two of the plates together in order to make sure I got the exact right location for the adapter hole. Once I found that, I marked it off and then drilled out the foam so that I could put in the AC female adapter. With that done, I could use my hot wire cutting tool to etch out some grooves for my wires to run through. Using that little break in the rock wall, I ran my wires for the campfire down behind the back wall and over to the female plug for the AC adapter. This piece with the plug-in will sit right inside this hole that I drilled. Now then, this leads out to the campfire right here, and then I also want some overhead lights over here, so I have to take another wire, run it from the top. I'm going to run it down this channel here and connect it so that all three of these wires are connected. Now a quick plug-in, and we're going to see if all my connections were proper and the campfire lights up. It is finally time to glue this bad boy together.
You know what? With as many of these as I have done, you think I would have come up with some sort of system, some way that, I don't know, I might get measurements correct. But no, I done went and screwed up again.
You know something, Amos. The Lord poured your brains in with a teaspoon and somebody joggled his arm.
Well, let me tell you what I did. I made this absolutely gorgeous campfire, and I guesstimated about the size of what a campfire should be for characters of the size that I wanted to work with. When I finished the campfire, the characters were way small. They were about just slightly over the size of my fire. Well, that didn't work out so well. So I had to build my characters in a larger scale so that they look more appropriate next to the fire. And that's okay. That's all right. There's room in there for them. But my issue comes in now. See, it's like the snowball effect, you know? You start with one issue and you roll into another one, you roll into another one. So now on my little gold mine entrance, my characters are just too big. So now I have to rebuild the gold mine entrance, which also I think I got this handled. I'm actually going to build a gold mine entrance over the gold mine entrance that I have here, and then just try to build up the rock wall around it.
So I chiseled out the old mine entrance, added the new larger wooden beams, then I grabbed one of my texturing sticks and started going over those beams to make them look very old, like maybe railroad ties possibly. After that, I grabbed a stiff wire brush, ran it across the wood to give it some grain, and it looks better than the previous. So I mentioned before that I found this Sculptamold product. I bought it off of Amazon. It was not as susceptible to that leaching of water that plaster is, so I really liked working with it. It had a pretty decent working time. It started to harden on me at about 5 to 10 minutes. So don't mix very large batches of this, just what you're going to need for what you're in front of right now. Then mix more and so on and so forth. It seems to be a very fibrous material that's very lightweight, mixed with some sort of either a powdered glue or maybe even a little bit of plaster, but it does not have that exothermic reaction that plaster does. As a result, it does not heat up in your hands. I also found that it didn't dry out my hands as much. I used the Sculptamold to fill in a lot of the little cracks between the pieces and of course the box. I also built up the rock wall around the mine timbers a little bit and created a little bit more definition. After that, I went down across the floor so that I would have an uneven texture to the ground instead of that very, very flat board. I wanted to make it look like it was an actual terrain. So I'm not really going to go into the painting of the rocks on this. I'm actually leaning towards putting a link in the description on how to paint realistic rocks. 2 reasons. 1, guy does a great job of teaching you, because my rocks look pretty good, but 2, I'm not a professional rock painter, so why reinvent the wheel? Go watch his video because he does a really good job. But I've got my rocks all painted now,
And I've painted my figurines, and that's another area which I am not that great at, which is painting figurines. I'm getting better, but I'm not a pro like some of these guys. Anyway, working on my painting, and today I am going to put the sand down on the diorama. And so I usually do that with a little bit of Elmer's glue, and I have some various different colors of sand. So I'm going to go ahead and use a sand that I think will work really well with this particular diorama. And we'll see how it all looks. Hopefully I like the result.
This is looking really good. Now it's time to populate my world. I knew roughly where I wanted the Indians to be, but as far as the foliage and any rocks that are around, I decided to channel my inner Bob Ross and just look at the terrain and think about where things would live. I did decide to put a couple of plants up on the ledge towards the front edge of the diorama, and that was to try to give the impression that the edge didn't just end there, that it went someplace. Otherwise, I just looked at the terrain, I looked at the rocky outcroppings and decided, does this plant live here? Would grass grow in this area? And just try to make it look as organic as possible. In this picture, you can see I've now got some of the cowboys in place, and I want to bring your attention to how the foliage looks. I tried to make it look as much like what a desert scene would look like. The grasses, I had bought some small scale yellow grass. I cut it to size and then used a hot glue gun at the very base of the grass to hold it all together. And then before it completely cooled, I tacked it down into the ground, and for the most part looked really, really good. If I could hide the little glue spot anywhere, I would do that. Maybe hide it behind a rock or an outcropping. The next step here really is trying to figure out the lighting scheme on this. As always, I painted myself into a corner. I have Laura with a lantern shining a light up to the Indians, and my big problem is that there's supposed to be an open sky behind them, and instead there is, of course, a piece of wood that's painted like sky. So when I shine a light up toward the Indians, of course, it casts a shadow on the sky, which doesn't really quite work. So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to make that lantern look like it's illuminating the Indians. The other problem, of course, is shining the light in different areas causes shadows to not be perfect. In a perfect world, I would have had the lantern that she's holding actually shine the light, but being 3D printed, didn't work out so well that way. First off, I'd like to say I love how this looks with just the campfire illumination, but I need that lantern to look like it's lit. Let's try the white light first. No, I don't like that at all. Next, I decided to try a flickering yellow light, and I actually liked this look the best of all. I wanted to give the diorama that blue glow of moonlight, and very similar to the problems I was having with the Bride's Attic, the blue was just a little bit too intense. I decided that I would go with some sort of diffuser. So I bought a ton of these ornament ball deals for the Madame Leota diorama, and I don't have any use for them. What I'm thinking is if I cut out a section of this rounded dome, sand it, and put the LED on the inside of it, it may diffuse the light out enough
that I get good bluish lighting without that spot lampy effect. So I could have made it a little deeper, but I think it'll still work. So now I got to sand that up. And there we have it, our diffuser. And now I got to see how well it works. So with my diffuser, I also figured out that if I put a little black dot right there, I'll decrease some of the spotlighting effect that my LED will do. Instead, it should bounce around the light a little bit better. So now that I got my LEDs kind of in place, I'm going to tape them down and then try to glue this sucker. As I said earlier, I made this book Nook for my wife for her birthday, and she absolutely loved it. And let me tell you why. My wife is a big Western movie fan, and actually she even loves Western books, such as those from Louis L'Amour. We've listened to a couple of them while on long family trips. So this seemed like the perfect thing to do for her. I actually had a little story in my mind for this diorama, and it was of a family that traveled through the desert and stumbled upon a little alcove behind an arch that hid a mine, the Lonesome mine. After a day of exploring the mine, they find a rich vein of gold. The father chisels out the gold. They are making merry all the way on out of the mine, and in such a rush that he actually spills some of the gold on the exterior of the mine. And you can see in this picture a little bit of gold that is spilled on the ground. They decide to set camp for the night, and they catch a wild bird. They start a campfire. They cook the bird. The dad's standing there eating a turkey leg and drinking from his flask, while the boy is warming his hands at the fire, and the daughter is playing her violin in celebration. Suddenly, the dog starts barking, and so the mother picks up her lantern and shines it overhead to see what it is that has alarmed the dog.
Say, about these Indians. Seems like they hardly ever attack at night.
Up on the ridge, she notices 3 Indians silently walking across the ridge in the night. Now, I'll leave it to your imagination as to how this story ends, but just let me tell you that my wife absolutely loved this diorama. She can't wait to put it into her office. Now, I know I teased a series of Pirates of the Caribbean book nooks, and they are still in the works. However, there's a couple of things I need to do first. One, I need to mock them up. And I might do a video on how to mock up a book nook. The second thing is I need to learn how to use Arduino, because I want to do something special with these nooks. I want to integrate sound and lighting. So I think it's going to be pretty cool. In their interim, while I'm learning, I'm also going to be embarking on a different project. Now, I know that most of the videos on my channel are about book nooks, but this new project is more on the arts and crafts kind of side of my channel. And if you're interested in that sort of thing, you may be interested in the next couple of videos. Until then, if you keep watching, I'll keep building.